Dr. Jennifer Roback Morse is the founder of the Ruth Institute, a global nonprofit organization that defends the family at home and in the public square and equips others to do the same. She is passionate about equipping family advocates with the knowledge and confidence to defend the family at home and in the public square. Dr. Morse was a campaign spokeswoman for the California's winning Proposition 8 campaign, defining marriage as a union of one man and one woman. She has authored and co-authored 5 books and spoken around the globe on marriage, family, and human sexuality. Her work has been translated into Spanish, Chinese, Korean, Polish, Turkish. Did I say it correctly? Very good. The native language of the Micronesian islands. She earned her PhD at the University of Rochester in New York and taught economics at Yale and George Mason universities. Dr. Morse and her husband are parents of an adopted child, a birth child, a goddaughter, and were foster parents for San Diego County to 8 foster children. In 2015, Dr. Morse and her husband relocated to Lake Charles, Louisiana, where it's always cold, where the work of the Ruth Institute continues. She actually asked if she needed a coat when she got up here. Dr. Morse, come on up.
All right, well, thank you, everybody, and thank you for the kind invitation to be here, and thank you, all of you, for coming. This is a really awesome ministry. I can totally tell this is a great ministry. Before we begin, I'd like to be sure that everybody received one of these there are 2 brochures, one called Do You Know a Survivor of the Sexual Revolution? The other, The Manifesto for the Family. If you did not receive them, would you raise your hand and some of the helpers will pass them out to you. I'm going to have people open them up. Midway through the talk, we'll be opening these up and looking at them, okay? So thank you very much. And this is an awesome ministry. I'm really impressed with what you guys are doing. So as was mentioned, I live now in Louisiana. And people think that we don't have seasons down there, but we actually do have seasons. We have 2 seasons in Lake Charles and most of Louisiana. The first season runs from June 1st to November 30th, so we're still in this season, and that is hurricane season. And that's going on right now, and we don't generally get hurricanes in Lake Charles. This is the last hurricane that hit landfall was Hurricane Rita in 2005, and that's because we have this totally awesome hurricane prayer that we say after every Mass. But anyway, I'm just saying that's why other places get zapped and we don't. Okay, so the other season that we have runs from December 1st to May 31st, and that is crawfish season. And crawfish season, as you see there on the slide, it says money cannot buy happiness, but it can buy crawfish, which is pretty much the same thing, okay? And we also have crawfish. You see up there the little cartoon, that's a crawfish playing the violin. The alligators play musical instruments also, and that's how you know you're in Louisiana. And people do actually dance in the street like that, so that's actually quite cool. Now, another thing you might not know about Louisiana is how big it is. You know, right now you think of it as being not a very big place, but if you were to go onto Google and Google this question, North America map around 1750, this is what you would get. Okay, so I'm just saying that big purple thing there, that is Louisiana, okay? So y'all can be honorary Cajuns, because it encompasses the entire Mississippi River Valley, okay? So you're definitely part of it, all right? I'm just saying. And we will be having a summit for survivors of the sexual revolution in July, and y'all are welcome to come down for that, and we will feed you. And the food there is really good. So, as was mentioned, the Ruth Institute defends the family. We're a global interfaith organization, much like you all are, to defend the family. And we combat the sexual revolution, and that's going to be the subject of my talk tonight. The sexual revolution is pretty much in the news every day. We have here images of Harvey Weinstein and Theodore McCarrick and Judge Kavanaugh, and there's always something related to these issues, so you really can't keep up very easily. So what I would like to offer you is the opportunity to sign up for the Ruth Institute newsletter. My new best friend here, Barry, here in the front, is going to circulate these little clipboards. If you would just pass them out. If you would like to subscribe to the Ruth Institute newsletter, just give me your name and email address. And also, I will send you a copy of these slides if I have your email address. And that way you don't have to scribble down all the notes from the way too much information that I'm going to try to stuff into your head in the next half hour. So, but these are ways you can stay informed by following our newsletter, joining us on the Facebook page, and my own blog, Dr. J's blog. As I mentioned, we're a global interfaith coalition to defend the family, and we try to explain to people why they believe what they believe. Because there are times when you need to give an account of yourself. And we find there are a lot of people of faith who know what they're supposed to do, but they can't explain why. And then when the pressure's on, they collapse, right? Because they can't offer an account of themselves, they don't know what to do or say. And the next thing they know, they're out in front of your sidewalk there. You're encountering them because they've made a really wrong choice that they can't get out of. So it's very important to be able to explain why you believe, what you believe. Now, one of our little projects is we have something we call the Ruth Institute Declaration on Unalienable Rights to go along with something that Secretary of State Pompeo has created. He's created a commission on unalienable rights to sort out the difference between what you and I think of as rights and what other people think of as rights, like the right to have an abortion and the right to have sex, for children to have sex without their parents knowing. I mean, that's what people at the United Nations think are children's rights, see? So this commission was formed, and we're like, okay, we're gonna help out. We're gonna let them know that there are regular people who care about this issue, asking them to defend the rights of children and the family. And we're using this little moniker, Make the Family Great Again, because people will come, you know, if they see that. So we're going to get red hats that say Make the Family Great Again on them. But anyway, so I would just call your attention to item 3 on our petition. You'll have a chance to look at this if you want to, but the right to life from conception to natural death, that's one of the things that we're asking the Secretary of State to consider a right when they're negotiating with foreign countries. So there's a bit of information about that over there, back there on the table. Now, this book that I've written called The Sexual State, this is the book that I understand was your book club this summer, that a number of you have read this book, and I'll be glad to autograph it if any of you bought it. The thing I have to tell you about this book, though, is that the sexual revolution is moving very quickly. Every day, something new is happening, something crazier, you know, each thing crazier and more horrible than the next, right? So as soon as this book was written, it was out of date. You know what I mean? Because you can't keep up. So what I'm going to do for you tonight is to lay out some of the principles, some of the structure behind how the sexual revolution works, because then you'll be able to apply that no matter what piece of garbage hits the fan. You see what I mean? So that's how we're going to approach this topic, because otherwise we'd be here all night, right? If we were going to talk about all the things. We don't want to do that, right? Okay, so, and I want to point out to you that in this book, the longest single chapter is a book about the contraceptive ideology and what I call propaganda for the contraceptive ideology. That is the longest single chapter. And you need to know, some of you may need that information because it's talking about the ways in which we are being lied to in a systematic manner. And so there's like a ton of footnotes in that chapter, and you won't want to just memorize it and rattle it off, but some of you will want that information because it will help you answer questions that people may have, okay? And so that's the value of having it all there in one place. You need to be a few steps ahead of the people that you're talking to. So here's the basic outline of what I'm going to talk about tonight. We're first of all going to talk about what is the sexual revolution and how your work as pro-life advocates fits into that. Secondly, I'm going to talk to you about the sexual state, because I want you to see how the sexual state operates. And we'll be talking about propaganda, and we'll be talking about hiding and silencing the victims. And then finally, I'm going to give you a few strategic considerations that apply, I think, to everyone who's working in this area, the pro-life movement as well as pro-family advocates, kind of all of us, to see the big picture, how these things fit together, and how we might think strategically to get something done. Now, I can tell from being here, talking with all of you, that you guys have a very good sense of the strategic. You have an idea of what you're trying to get done, and you're trying to move the ball forward, right? And that's very important, to have goals that are attainable, but to have a clear picture of where you're trying to go. So that's how we fit in, how me and the Ruth Institute and all the work that we're doing fits in with what you guys are doing on the pro-life side. And generally, we don't do a whole lot of pro-life stuff at the Ruth Institute because we know all of you have it covered. There are all these other issues that nobody's dealing with, but I think they all fit together. It's all one giant issue, which has to do with what do you think is the purpose of sex, right? And you guys are dealing with one part of it on the front lines. You guys are there face to face with people, dealing with the consequences of this ideology. And one at a time, trying to talk them out of it, right? One at a time, trying to move them from where they are to someplace better, to a better way of life, not just to save the baby, but to hand the woman and her husband off to the services that can help them to have a more sustainable, humane life together as a family. So let's turn then to what is the sexual revolution. And this, of course, is all in the book. Those of you who read the book, will be aware of this. But I define the sexual revolution having three parts. The sexual revolution says that a good and decent society should do three things. First, a good and decent society must do everything possible to separate sex from babies. So you're entitled to have as much sex as you want without a baby ever appearing. And that's the mark of a good society. This is what these people are promoting all around the world, right? Is that you should be able to do whatever you want. This is the mark of an advanced civilization, that you can have sex without having a baby, okay? So that I call that the contraceptive ideology. And it's 1/3 of the sexual revolution. It's the part you guys are most involved in because you're dealing with the most immediate consequence of trying to implement this thing, right? The second tenet, you could say, of the sexual revolution is that a good and decent society should do everything possible to separate both sex and babies from marriage. So you can have sex with anybody you want, whether you're married or not. And if a baby should appear, kids are resilient. They're fine. They'll be fine with whatever you decide to do, whether you're with their other parent or not, whether you switch out the parents, right? The kids will be fine. I call this the divorce ideology. And the Ruth Institute spends quite a bit of time on the divorce ideology, but I'm not going to say anything about that tonight. But in case you're interested, we've got a lot of information about it. Third point is that a good and decent society should do everything possible to wipe out all differences between men and women, except those explicitly chosen by the individuals themselves, and that's what I call the gender ideology. I gave a couple of talks on that just in the last week, including one at Providence Academy yesterday. So of these three aspects of the sexual revolution, I have 45-minute talks on each one. So if you're interested in them, here's the link. You can go find it when I send you the slides. You can just click on it and you can get that information for yourself. So let me say a few words about the contraceptive ideology. And I want to emphasize that this is the ideology, not the technology, and not the theology. All of those things are important, but I'm just going to talk about the ideology right now. The basic idea is that sex is a sterile activity and sex is an entitlement. That every person old enough to give meaningful consent is entitled to child-free, problem-free, guilt-free sex as much as they want. And the purpose of the government is to give you that at minimum cost. That's the sexual state. That's the contraceptive ideology. And this is what gives rise to predatory sexual activity. These guys think they're entitled. You cannot take the idea that you're entitled and somehow protect people from abuse. That doesn't work. That's a square circle. It can't be done. Okay? So I've got a little article about what Jeffrey Epstein, Theodore McCarrick, and Harvey Weinstein have in common, and that's basically it. They all think they're entitled. They're rich, they're powerful, they get to do what they want. That's the contraceptive ideology. Now, let me make a distinction between the ideology and the technology and the consequences versus the theology. I hardly ever talk about theology. First off, I don't really have any training in that area. My work is all in social science, so I leave the theology to other people. I'm not saying it's unimportant. I'm just saying other people can cover that. So we'll talk about the, kind of the social sciencey stuff. So I want to mention the first demographic transition. I hate it that I can't. I've got to move. I'm sorry, I can't stand it. Okay, the first demographic transition is when the population and the fertility of Europe fell by half over a period of 200 years. And it was discovered, this demographic transition was discovered in 1929, looking back over the past 200 years. And what I want to point out to you about this is that this was just a little bit before the pill. People, the pill was approved in 1960. Okay, somehow the peasants of France figured out how to control their fertility. They figured out how to have fewer babies, and they did it without the pill. How did they do that? What were they even thinking? Well, they did things that we would today call natural family planning. That's what they did. Periodic abstinence, extended lactation, delayed age at first marriage, that's how they did it. Okay, now, the reason I'm pointing this out is because you'll often hear people say, the pill caused everything. The pill changed everything. No, the pill is an inanimate object that sits on a shelf. The pill didn't do a darn thing. The point is, I'm sorry, I'm getting so worked up, but this really upsets me. Look, the peasants of France never for a moment believed that they could make a whole society around the idea that sex is sterile. They were never trying to do that. They never thought of doing that. Okay? It's only in the 1960s and 70s that people get this brilliant idea that we could create heaven on earth if only we could have all the sex we wanted without a baby ever happening. That's why I say the ideology is much more important than the technology itself. You see what I mean? And this ideology has been relentlessly promulgated to us. Right? We have been relentlessly given this idea that sex is an entitlement. Sex doesn't really make babies. You can do whatever you want. And of course, as you guys know, what's the consequence of that? People have sex in situations that cannot possibly support a baby because they're not thinking about the baby, and then they end up on your doorstep. Right? That's how it works. And a lot of pro-life people have understood this for a long time, that contraception is not the solution to abortion. Okay, I mean, the two things go hand in hand. I hope I'm not offending anybody by saying this, because I know sometimes these coalitions are fragile around this issue, but we have to see what the ideology has done to us. This is what the ideology has done. Now, we ask ourselves, why do we get this stuff thrown at us all the time? Where is this all coming from? You probably some of you have been to the March for Life in Washington, D.C. You know it's a huge gathering, 500,000 people generally. This past year we had the March for Life, and then we had the Women's March, which was all these women who were mad at Donald Trump or whatever, and they all wore these funny hats. I don't know if you remember the pink hats, right? So the March for Life, as usual, got zero mainstream media coverage, and the Women's March gets oh so much coverage with, like a tenth of the people. Why is that? Why is that? I have an answer for you. The sexual state will tell you the answer to that question. It's because the ideology of the contraceptive ideology has had an impact on how everybody organizes their lives. The upper end of our economy is built around delayed childbearing. The price of entry into the professions is you postpone childbearing. So people who are lawyers, doctors, PhDs, professional journalists, any of the professions, you are expected to postpone childbearing in order to enter those professions. Oh, women and men can both do it all as long as they postpone childbearing. So what that means is that the people at the upper ends of the society, the upper ends of the economy, are disproportionately people who have used contraception and possibly abortion during their 20s. I mean, maybe they're all living chaste lives until they finish graduate school or medical school, but maybe they aren't too, right? So the kind of person who values their family and their chastity more than their career is the kind of person who's home with a bunch of babies, and she is not as likely to end up at the top upper reaches of her profession. I have this picture of our 3 female Supreme Court justices, 2 of whom are childless women. Okay? So I just want you to have that image in your mind. Among the educated, and this is an image of Jordan Peterson interviewing Kathy Newman, who is a top BBC journalist. She had no idea what he was talking about, right? She had no idea what he was trying to say to her, because she's living in that world of no babies, maybe 1 IVF baby when you're 40, right? This is the career path of the people who succeed in the professions. And it's kind of a self-perpetuating model that favors one kind of person over another. Now, among the less educated, what has the contraceptive ideology done to the less educated people? And you probably see this on the sidewalks fairly regularly, that the idea that everybody's entitled to sex, combined with some of the incentives that we have built into our welfare program, has meant that people are having babies without being married. Some of them are having abortions, but some of them want their babies. There's no reason for them to put it off. They don't have a PhD or a CPA waiting for them. So they have their babies and they're single parents. Marriage has disappeared among the lower classes. All but disappeared. There are some neighborhoods that nobody's ever seen a wedding. Okay? So this is part of the way that ideology has penetrated into the lower classes. Family breakdown, huge problem. Multiple partner fertility, okay, which is multiple partner fertility. That's a new name they had to come up with to describe what was going on in the lower classes. If a woman has a child out of wedlock, the odds are very high that her second child will also be out of wedlock and with a different man. And the impact that has on the family is profound, and we have only begun to penetrate and understand the full impact of it. But this is what the idea that sex is an entitlement, this is what it's done at the upper end, this is what it's done at the lower end. So this is the strategic consideration number 1. Remember I said I was going to give you some strategic considerations. First thing is to be aware that delayed childbearing is the price of entry into the professions. And therefore, the professions are dominated by people who are predisposed to be in favor of the contraceptive ideology. Some of them have guilty consciences about it. Some of them have profound conversion experiences. I would put myself in that category. That's another story. I'm not going to tell my conversion story, but I would put myself in that category, so I know it happens. But you're also dealing with some people in the professions who have guilty consciences, and as we all know, guilty consciences can really make you stupid, right? I mean, that's Thomism 101, I think, or maybe second level. But anyway, yeah, it's a kind of an important point of moral theology. But this explains the difference in the coverage between those 2 marches. Because the people in the newsrooms making the decisions about where to send their cameras and what the headlines should say, they are disproportionately drawn from people who have postponed their fertility. Okay? So this is why this is so much of a problem. Okay. So now what I'd like you to do is take this pamphlet that looks like this called the Manifesto for the Family. I'll just mention the Manifesto for the Family is a pamphlet version of the last chapter of The Sexual State. We want to be sure people got a chance to see this. So the Manifesto for the Family, there are several items that specifically have to do with what we have just been talking about. If you want to improve the family, item 4 on that list says remove the marriage tax from all welfare programs. In other words, take out all the disincentives to marry that are built into our public assistance programs. And these are things, by the way, that the government must stop doing. Now, perhaps some of you have libertarian friends or libertarian-leaning friends, people who will say, well, you pro-life people, you social conservatives, you just want to boss people around to get into people's bedrooms. And you know we can't regulate morality. We can't legislate morality. Anybody ever heard that? All right, so this manifesto for the family that I put in your hand, the first 10 items on it are things that the government is now doing that the government should stop doing. things the government never had any business doing in the first place. We never had any business having marriage taxes built into our welfare programs. Correct? Correct. We also never had any business having public schools teach children how to put condoms on bananas. Okay, we need to end sex education in the schools. That's my position. I know that's not your issue, but I think it's relevant to your issue, and you should know that there's somebody out there advocating for ending sex education in the schools. There's somebody out there who's even crazier than you are, right? And so if anybody tells you you're crazy, you just point over there, the Ruth Institute. We're not as crazy as that. So, we also have opinions about women's studies programs and gender studies programs. I'm not going to mention that. Another item that I want to mention, that some of you are aware of, some of you may not be aware of, is that we should stop governmental promotion and subsidization of contraception. This is item 5. Item 6, you'll see abolish abortion. You guys thought of that already. That's no surprise. Okay, but number 5, stop subsidizing contraception. Stop pushing people to use it. If you start analyzing it, you will see that contraception has never just been sitting there on the shelf waiting for people to buy it if they felt like it. Very soon after Griswold versus Connecticut in 1965, the government started actively promoting it. The period of time between when it was legal and the time it was actively promoted was about 5 minutes. Okay? So tell your libertarian friends, guys, we need to stop subsidizing it. How many children Mrs. Morse has is none of anybody's business. Okay, guys? So could we get that crap out of the Medicaid rules, please? I mean, there's a bunch of stuff. There are a bunch of places where it's embedded. All right. So part 2, how the sexual state operates. First, we're going to talk a bit about propaganda and why that's important. Now, this, I think, is one of the most important things for you to think about as you read The Sexual State or after you read The Sexual State. Remember, I mentioned the 3 parts of the sexual revolution, that the revolutionaries, the true revolutionaries, are committed to creating a society where they separate sex from babies. Now, there's just one problem with that. Sex actually does make babies. They want to separate both sex and babies from marriage. They think this is the mark of a good society. Just one problem. Kids actually do need their parents. They want to wipe out all the differences between men and women. Newsflash, men and women are different, right? The body actually is something significant. That is why I say that the sexual revolution is irrational. It is impossible. These people are committed to doing something that cannot be done. But the attempt to do something impossible is very important because it can't stand on its own. All right? So if you want to build a society around the natural law, that can work because nature reinforces the law all the time. If you want to build a society that says kids need their mothers and fathers, you will see all the time that that's true. Kids do need their mothers and fathers. If you want to build a society that says men and women are different, you will discover on a daily basis that men and women are different. Sitting at the breakfast table, you will look across the breakfast table and see this person you're married to and wonder if it's an alien life form. Every time, right? Doesn't this happen sometimes, right? So you don't need to prop up the idea that men and women are different, right? And you certainly don't need to create a fantasy around the idea that sex makes babies. You're going to, that view will be reinforced by reality. These little babies keep popping up, all right? So the point is, the sexual revolution relies on force and propaganda to keep it going, because they've got to tamp down all of the evidence that contradicts it. And they are busily tamping it down all the time. That is why it has become a totalitarian ideology. It is a totalitarian ideology, quite apart from left or right. I never call it a leftist movement, because there are plenty of right-wing people who are involved in this thing and have been historically. And you all know that when you see how certain political parties drag their feet about doing anything. They say they'll help and then they don't. I wonder why, okay? So it's a totalitarian ideology all on its own, distinct from left or right. and no Christian should have anything to do with it. So for the true revolutionary, and this is true whether it's the sexual revolution or any other revolution, the issue is never the issue. The issue is always the revolution and the accumulation of power. That's what it's always about. That's what it's been about from the beginning. Now, let's talk about a little propaganda for the sexual revolution. I could, if I chose, change this slide every week because there'd be some new piece of craziness that we could put in here. But I have just a couple of things that I'm going to mention. The one that doesn't have a photo here is that in the summer of 2017, the magazine Teen Vogue had an article called Anal Sex, What You Need to Know. Teen Vogue. Teen Vogue is marketed to middle schoolers. What a middle schooler needs to know about anal sex is nothing. Nothing. They don't need to know anything about it. Right? But here it is. Here it is being actively promoted, okay? Now, the other one here is that there was an article around the same time, the summer of 2017, in the New York Times, why women had better sex under socialism. Now, they know this how? Exactly? What, But anyway, this is, clearly a propaganda puff piece. I put this up here for this reason. Look at the illustration that they chose to put with that article. This cheerful, well-scrubbed, well-fed Ukrainian peasant. They probably ruffled through their archives, the New York Times, to find the propaganda photos that they used when they were trying to cover for the Ukrainian famine. Right? Remember the Ukrainian famine that the New York Times said didn't happen back in the day? Okay, same photo. I mean, I don't know that for a fact, but I mean, if I was going to cover for a famine, that'd be a good photo. I'd pick that one out. But an article. Why is this news? Why women had better sex under socialism. What is this doing what is this doing in the newspaper? Why is this even news? It's propaganda. Okay, that's the point. That's what you need to understand. This propaganda has been going on for a long time. This is a screenshot of a video that you can now see on YouTube. I'm not going to play it. It's produced by Walt Disney for the Population Council. Please look at the date, 1968. Walt Disney produced this movie. It's basically a 10-minute movie that has Donald Duck in it that talks about why family planning is such a good thing. Okay? They were working already, Hollywood and the Population Council were working hand in glove to promote the contraceptive ideology in 1968. So here's strategic consideration number 2. All of the ideologies of the sexual revolution are false. And the sexual state needs propaganda and power to sustain itself. Now, what do we conclude from that? We conclude, do not waste too much time or energy or alarm or bandwidth worrying about refuting their propaganda, because it comes at you faster than you can deal with it. A better strategy, I would say, at least some of the time, is to identify it. That's propaganda. It has been produced by an advocacy organization. I'm not interested in it. Let's talk about the real subject, right? So in other words, I used to do a lot of this type of work. A study would come out saying, lesbians make the best parents or whatever it was, and people would call me up right away, Dr. Morse, did you see this new study? It came from Australia, or whatever. And I would, dutifully read it and just, try to straighten it out and stuff. And they would have a sample of 15 people that they recruited from a lesbian coffee house or something. And, it was just endless. It was just endless, and it still is. This stuff is just out there. So strategic consideration for you is that you don't necessarily have to refute every piece of it. You may just want to say, that's propaganda, it's garbage, let's move on. All right. And again, as I mentioned, The Sexual State, the book deals with all of this and lays this all out. So now, if you would now, open this pamphlet, Do You Know a Survivor of the Sexual Revolution? Okay, that's a rhetorical question. Everyone knows a survivor of the sexual revolution. When you open it up, you'll see a list of people, of different types of people who have been harmed in some manner by the sexual revolution. You look down this column here, you'll see the types of people that we have listed. And I want you to see this because this has to do with the victims. This is where we're going to talk about hiding and silencing the victims. So some specific people who have been harmed by the sexual revolution, the heartbroken career woman. This is the woman who thought she'd have 10 kids even though she didn't get started till she was 38 and had tenure. That's me. I was actually kind of good at math too, thinking you'd start at 38 and have 10 kids. What was I even thinking? Anyway, the post-abortive woman is a survivor of the sexual revolution, children of divorce, the reluctantly divorced, and 12 different groups of people here. So what I would say is we need to organize ourselves, but who do we organize? And this is kind of the principle of the Ruth Institute, that we want to organize the victims and survivors of the sexual revolution. Children of divorce, the reluctantly divorced, or you might say abandoned spouses, refugees from the hookup culture, refugees from the gay lifestyle, that is people who have lived a gay lifestyle and want to live some other way. What I want you to notice about all these people is that they are socially invisible. You're not allowed to know about them. If you are a child of divorce, you are told to be quiet about how badly it hurt. If your spouse abandoned you, you're supposed to get over it and move on. Okay? It's very much like, and of course, if you have decided that you don't want to live a gay lifestyle, those people are savaged in the media. Not only are they not supposed to exist, they're also attacked in the media. This is a deliberate strategy. You need to see that that's deliberate on their part. So our response is to give those very people a voice. To get those people together, give them a voice. Now, this is a photo of a post-abortive woman. In a way, I got the idea from the pro-life movement because the post-abortive woman has been kind of a game changer in the pro-life movement. She's been a very important new element, new strategic element. She sits there with her sign. This lady, I took this photo at the San Diego Walk for Life, the first year we had it, and this lady just comes and she sits there with her sign. She doesn't have to say a word. She's just sitting there with that sign. Year after year, she comes with that thing. And so it's a testimony to the fact that we've all been bamboozled by this ideology, that people do regret their abortions, that there are problems. So the post-abortive woman, we want to expand that strategy and talk about the children of divorce and the people who were once gay and are no longer gay, that kind of thing. Broaden that basic strategy of giving voice to people who have been silenced and whom the revolution needs to silence. So that's the third strategic consideration. Because the sexual revolution systematically silences its victims, our strategy, our response is to give voice to the victims and honor the victims and stop calling them victims, treat them as survivors. Right? The survivor word is an important word. It's an important, more uplifting word than victimization. So just review the strategic considerations. Recognize that delayed childbearing is the price of entering the professions. Recognize that that the sexual state needs propaganda, therefore don't refute it, just identify it. And finally, give voice to the victims of the sexual revolution. That's an important potential breakthrough strategy that we can have in our analysis. So I want to encourage you to purchase the book if you haven't already, and I'll autograph it. And do sign up for the newsletter is that still floating around the clipboards. If you haven't had a chance to sign up for it, you certainly may. And then they've been lodged back here at the book table if you need a chance. And don't forget to sign the petition to make the family great again. And here are a few resources. And so now I'd like to take the opportunity to reintroduce Brian Gibson and bring Brian back up here. He, as you know, is the driving force behind the Pro-Life Action Ministries. And you can see that what you guys are doing here is a very important part of combating the whole sexual revolution. You think of it in terms of the pro-life movement and the babies that you're saving, but you're also dealing with this much bigger picture because you are a witness to the fact that the sexual revolutionary view of human sexuality is incorrect. It is deadening. It's deadly. And the alternative view, the traditional Christian sexual morality is life-giving, humane, and it's the only alternative to the sexual revolution that is intellectually coherent. You are part of the witness to that truth, to those realities. Your people here are inspiring you. They are training you. This organization equips you for success in this area. And I personally am very grateful for the work that you're doing. Let me now introduce again Brian Gibson. Thanks so much.